But to your point, and then when I look at some of the accounts of the Bible story about the kings and rulership, it was very interesting because the destruction or the demise of the Jewish nation as we know it began to occur and began to move away from the God's principle when the Jews decided they wanted a human king. They wanted a man representing them rather than, again, getting their direction from God. So I can understand clearly how, as you just described in Egypt, happened, where you took away that responsibility, accountability from God and say, hey, this man, which, again, in harmony with the biblical teaching, is that this man then began to take on his own self-interest. You know, I remember, and it may be in harmony with what Jehovah saw with the Egyptian, but he mentioned to the Jews, hey, look, you have a human king. He's going to take away your women. He's going to take horses. He's going to build armies. He's going to do all of this in his own self-interest, not yours. You're going to understand that if you rely on God, He's looking out for your self-interest. If you rely on man, you can be hurt, if you put it that way.
It takes me back to something we were saying in the sense of civility,
yes,
and how to be able to recognize civility and what it takes in order to recognize civility within a people. You said, could it be in one man? Could it be in two men? And my point was to say, well, God's power is so awesome that He can move us en masse. And so as we talk about that, we look at the Jews and their ability to achieve civility within themselves.
Okay.
Historically, from a biblical standpoint, it happened, and then it fell away.
Right.
Historically, from an archaeological standpoint, it never really got to happen in the way as described in the Bible, because archaeological research doesn't show a Jewish nation from Syria down to the Euphrates, on the Kush or whatnot. We see nothing like that, and these civilizations around it speak nothing of that. Again, what I believe a lot of the Old Testament to be, the Jewish understanding to be, since it was all oral, was traditions of other cultures, right? And the only culture that we know of that did something that was that great was, again, Egypt.
Okay.
But as we look at these people who claim to be the chosen people, to have the one word of God, the one, the choosing of God and whatnot, we don't see the power of love move through them as a people and expand out the way we see it with other civilizations.
You know, it's, as I think through that, and it's something I think we can talk to yeah.
I want to add another piece, because maybe people may want to say, oh, you're anti-Semitic, and so on and so forth. But throughout time, the Jews have been treated bad as they've gone from place to place to place to place, what we see within the historical record. And so they've created Israel today. And something I believe is in consequence. If I display love for people and so on and so forth, then my treatment is going to be based on that display I give towards them. But here we have the Jews who have been treated and bad in all these places they've gone to, and yet we give no responsibility to them.
Right.
They have no responsibility to the fact that they were taken in by all these different cultures and then rejected, in a sense, by these different cultures.
Yeah.
I would say that's because that's a rejection of those other people's cultures. Now, Jews would say, well, we wanted to maintain our own culture, and so on and so forth. It's like, but what we can see, if you believe in evolution, is that all cultures evolve, that they all intermingle and mix. And their refusal to intermingle and mix has meant their mistreatment, right? They've rejected other people, and rejecting other people, those other people reject them, and that could be the cause of why we see them being mistreated throughout Western civilization, at least.
I think there's some validity in what you've said. And it's the way as you said, you look at it from one perspective, I'm going to look at it from a different perspective. I do believe when I look at the Bible story and the Jews, and whether, and I think, yeah, let's define them of the Jews, but I just want to define it as God's people. I don't care whether they're Jewish, Egyptian, or whatever, but within the scope of this world, and as I understand it, is you have that dual influence, Satan's influence and God's influence. So within this world that existed, with the evolution or the distortion of God's principle, as we evolved through time, we began to distort and destroy the identity of God and the Christian values so far that God said, wait a minute, I have to put within this world, within this multiplicity that exists, I have to create my identity. I have to identify some people that reflect my true principles. And he selected the Jews. Now, as the Jews, as he was teaching them, because part of the issue was teaching and guiding. As he was teaching and guiding, they began to reject the principle. And one of the principles that occurred when the Jews, again, from a biblical perspective, exited Egypt, is it says, don't adopt those principles. Don't go back and hold on to those principles, because those principles are not in harmony with my original guiding principles. So over time, the Jews, as those individuals, began to reject God's principle, or as we learn, begin to combine the principles that existed from Egypt or other cultures at that time, try to bring it into the principle that God defined. And indeed, as you said, as they went, why did they have to disperse? They dispersed because at that time they chose to disobey God, do their own thing, and God took away they no longer represented him. And in effect, as they disperse in all these places and begin to apply these distorted views of God's teaching, to your point, their superiority or their attitude of being financial gurus and controlling the economic systems in these areas, people begin to reject it. Clearly. And do I believe today that the Jewish nation are representative of God's principles? No. Now, I will go back and I will provide to you in one of our discussions the biblical references that I used to say that. Now, I'm not saying Jews are bad people. I'm not saying any of that. All I'm saying is that there was a time when the Jewish nation reflected or was targeted to reflect God's principle. They chose not to. And in that way, they no longer represent that core value that today I believe to be Jehovah's principles that has not changed since the beginning. Based on love. The very same essence that you and I talk about, that if all of us, regardless of culture, nation, apply that true concept of love, I care about you just as much as I care about me. So the decisions I make, I'm going to consider the impact on you. I'm not going to just simply say, I want the best out of this and I don't care about you. I was talking to a young man last night, and he was talking about a business arrangement we have with this guy. He says, I'm paying him $150 a week, but I make $640. And I said, that's good. You're really being loving to this guy. But are you truly being loving? See, now you've just described an unequitable distribution of wealth. You've just said, he's doing all the work. I'm contracting to do all the work, but I am retain all of the benefit that is provided for that work.
Greed.
Exactly. That's not love. As he was sharing it with me, he thought it was love. He felt that because I gave him a piece of it, a very small piece, for the effort he made, I'm showing love. That's greed. And that's where, as we see man, ego, his twisting or redefinition of God's principle begin to justify his, I don't want to say bad, but distorted view and make it good. As the Bible said, sometimes in a man's thinking, the things he does are righteous. It's right. But when you really think about that, in a loving cultural exchange, in an environment where I care about you and you care about me, if I contract you to do a work, shouldn't you be the one that gain the most? Or even if it's not, shouldn't it be equitable? Shouldn't it be 50-50?
Yes.
See, that's the reflection of love we talk about. That's the level of civility. That's the level of Christian values and principles that I believe in.
Now, I don't disagree with your Christian principles or Christian values. We go back to the beginning of the conversation and saying that God felt the need to choose a people to display his concept of love on earth. Now, again, for me, I think that's people's ego who feels that they are displaying perfection, right? The only way to recognize God's perfection is to see it within his creation. And so the difference between what we have today and what they had back then is our ability to see and perceive creation, to actually live under the stars. Because we have all these lights and stuff in our great civilization, it blocks out the perfection of the universe. And so, it's like I had an opportunity to be in Oklahoma and see the Oklahoma sky. Being in California, being in LA my whole life, I had never saw the universe displayed in that way. And so for me, perfection is already displayed. And the Egyptians who monitored this perfection in a way no one had really monitored it before, emulated it, right? You can see they show that the pyramids are actually laid out in the same way as constellations. And so you can see Egyptians modeling their society, their civilization off of the perfection of the universe around them. And in that creating and being moved in a way no other group of people have been moved since. Well, and let me take that back. I wouldn't say no other group of people have been moved since. As other people have come into contact with the Egyptian civilization, they've also adapted their same understandings. You can see it within the Greek pillars and whatnot of how they've established their civilization. It's pretty clear that the Greeks have taken their understanding from the Egyptians. Rome, again, we can see very clearly that Rome took their understanding from the Greeks. And so anyone who came into seeing these people's display of civility, how they were able to work together and achieve such great things to where we couldn't emulate putting together them pyramids the way they did, that they still stand. They stand as a testament to love, not slavery. Because only love would stand so long, so ardently, as a perfected shape. Right? It's like, why do the pyramids sit so long, so well? Because the geometry of them, right? What they were able to achieve mathematically was so precise. And that perfection, that mathematical perfection, comes from the universe that we are able to observe. It doesn't come from a people that we need to observe, but again, God's very creation around us. Okay.
So what I understand you to say then is that the display of the Egyptian, the pyramids and all those are not really attributed to the Egyptian, but they are a reflection of God's power. Because again, yes,
both, right?
Okay, but that's why I was a little confused, because you just mentioned that the pyramids are not necessarily a reflection of the Egyptians' culture.
I said the pyramids aren't a reflection of slavery. They're a reflection of love, in the sense of they were created out of a work of love, not out of a work of slavery.
Well, I'm going to challenge that for a minute.
Okay.
Because as my understanding of pyramids, why were they created? They were created as tributes to the pharaohs. So they were created as burial places and representation of pharaohs. Is that incorrect or incorrect? Correct. Incorrect. So what then maybe again, as we talk through a lot of things, is that people come to conclusions based on incorrect data. I won't say facts because I know how you feel about that, but incorrect data. So if I look at my ego, or my collection of knowledge that defines the pyramids and the reason behind the pyramids, as each one of those are representation of, they were built by pharaohs, and they were representation or manifestation of their rulership and their transition from this physical world, as they were representative of God, into the afterlife, when whatever they did there. Okay, so if I use that, yeah. So if I use that reflection of that purpose of the pyramid, then I'm gonna take it into a dialogue to say that in my belief in this world, that as we talked about, there's God and there's Satan, and some of the greatness, or some of the things that we define of greatness that occurred in this earth, is not a reflection of God's power, but is a reflection of Satan's power and influence. Not to suggest that the Egyptian pyramids are or not, but the point I'm saying is that the results of things that we see, observe, the results of human effort cannot always be attributed to God. Because as we said, there's conflicting influences that drives the outcome of action, behaviors, and attitude in this world.
As we talk, one thing I've always said is I believe in a duality, a good, a bad, a evil, positive, whatever. As what you say, a God, a devil. For me, there is spirit and ego that is that concept.
Okay.
And so as what we're saying about the pyramids, are they a representation of God? I don't feel anything in a sense other than what is God's creation is a representation of God. Okay. That's the universe.
I got you.
That anything created by man is created, one by the spirit and two by the ego. Okay. Right, and so it is definitely an ego that drives the need to have a pyramid, but it is also a spiritual calling in a sense to do it. Okay. And what we have within the pyramids are these very things that we're talking about within the book of the Going Forth by Day. Before they were put down in the papyruses, these great pharaohs wrote these things in the pyramids as ways for Egypt to operate. This was the successful way that I was able to drive my kingship. Okay. And because of those writings that we find in the pyramid and other pharaohs who wanted to come along and have this same type of understanding, or achieve ma'at, or balance, harmony, then they follow this spiritual understanding that again leads to 3,000 years of successful civilization. Now, civilization does not mean total love, total harmony, it means the ability to come together, go apart, come together, to find a common purpose. Right. And so I don't want to say that the pyramids were God, but I want to say that these egos were focused enough to achieve a level of perfection in the sense of geometry as far as math of what they had to be observing to get that. We can see their civility and their achievement or manifestation of that civility and the copycats that come after them. And then we are now again talking about the Jewish nation that does not achieve what I would see as God's perfection in their civilization, civility, temples, building, coming together, right? The happiness of working together that, you know, that comes when you're so in love with what you do that you make sure that every I is dotted, every T is crossed. You see somebody's like, man, they loved what they did right there. And then you see somebody who just like rushed it. They just kind of, I got to know, they didn't really care, and they just kind of put it together. Those fall while the person who really cared about what they did, just they put their love into it. That's a Van Gogh.
I can't argue that. I can't argue that, Jay. I think one of the challenge in what you, well, one of the elements of what you said is that yes, just like to me, just like the Egyptian civilization that went through highs and lows in a transition process, the Jews did as well. And I think, as you pointed out, that transition occurred because of, as they begin to reflect the spirit, ego, spirit, ego. So as they begin to move to the spirit, or work in harmony with the spirit, things went well. They move away from the spirit towards the ego, it didn't go as well. And I believe that's
it never came back up. Right? And what I'm saying in Egyptian timeline is this. What you're saying in, again, in comparison, the Egyptian timeline, right? You're saying this.
Clearly, the Jewish nations did not last as long as the Egyptian. No question.
Put their love into it.
Well, you see, I don't disagree. I don't agree with you, because one of the things I challenge with what you just said is that the Egyptian creation of the pyramid is a reflection of love. Love of what? Because the issue again,
it's not a reflection of love. It's a reflection of their love, of their craftsmanship, of their.
It was a reflection of the Pharaoh's love for himself. That's what it was.
Well, see, you don't see it in the sense of the people who are doing it, who are painting it, who are putting their craftsmanship into it as a sense of the reflection of their craftsmanship. I'm a computer geek. That's the thing I've been blessed with. The patience in the sense of it, that's the talent I've been blessed with. And in that, as I go to a job, if they doing healthcare, they doing whatever, I don't care what it is they're doing. I care about the fact that I'm a geek. And if I'm allowed to express my talent, then I express my talent. Right. If you see my talent expressed in a way that you're like, wow, it touches you, then that touch within you and whatnot is a reflection of that love I put into my work. Now, Pharaoh, being the person to be doing it, is not necessarily the driving reason, because again, if it was, you'd be like, this god dang Pharaoh, I gotta do this for this dang Pharaoh, and you just halfway do it.
I'm gonna challenge you for a minute, because what you've just described is a perfect example. The love of your craft allows you to reject the reason for the work. So like you said, I'm going in here to reflect my love for my craft, and I'm going to demonstrate it to these people. How many geeks like you go in with the same attitude as opposed to simply, I'm just going to get this money or do what I need to do and get out?
Well, it depends on what organization you're talking about.
Well, okay.
You could be talking about a Google of where you'll see a bunch of geeks like me who really love what they do. And then you'll see a bunch of corporations who just hire some geeks, you know, and they might look up on a geek like me, who cares and whatever. And so there's a difference between when you see it powered by geeks who really love it and they're doing what it takes to get those geeks and whatnot and keep those geeks working for them. You see a Google. But when you see an organization that's just, you know, they just kind of paying, back to what you said, you know, it's like an unequitable, then you'll just see a regular old corporation.
And I agree with you, because truly...
But can we deny the beauty within the Egyptian civilization?
Oh, no.
Teachings?
Absolutely not.
And because it goes way beyond pyramids.
I agree.
Right? We do understand that the temples that they created, the civilization that they created was beautiful.
Again,
right? But
I agree.
Again, but from Pharaoh's own understanding, from the understanding of the nobles who began to also have the book of the going forth by day, they all admit that it had to be in a harmony, not in a devotion to the Pharaoh. That devotion to the Pharaoh is not what is expressed in Egyptian culture. It's expressed in the propaganda that Pharaoh may put up on the walls of things, but within the writings and the sacred books of those who lived it. They again understood that it was about ma'at, about doing what was best in the world, putting out love, acceptance.
I can't argue that, and I think in essence, if all of us as individuals, whether back in the day or in today's, strive for ma'at or harmony, or more important, a reflection of agape love, that true, unbiased, unrestricted, this love that doesn't depend on quid pro quo, but true love that reflects principles. Yeah. Be a wonderful work. And most important, I believe, we will have it one day.
I believe that day is always of our choosing.
Interesting. and you know, as we again, one of the concepts, and we will talk about in the future is one of them that we've had the discussion with, and I went back and I looked up some things that I'm excited to tell you about, and that is the principle of God's kingdom, on whether it's an external government, an internal force, or a combination of the two, or one reflected in the other. So it's a concept that you and I have some commonality in, some differences, but our discussion have drove me to do some research. I'm excited to talk to you about next time.
All right. You know, mine is always, I believe we live in perfection, and everything has its purpose and its reason. Even those things we feel are people living in negativity, people living in squalor, people living in war and destruction and whatnot, that has purpose. There's a reason behind that for me not to have it, in a sense, it has to be. Right? We can't understand happiness without sadness. That duality, I believe that perfection exists in all things. And so what we perceive as a kingdom and whatnot, again, I just see as God's perfection. And it'll be good
and in effect it is.
Within time.
There you go. Brother, it's a pleasure as always. And I look forward to our continued discussion.